The Forgotten Attic. Samuel and Lillian Carter had always been drawn to old houses. They loved the history, the craftsmanship, and the sense that every home had a story waiting to be uncovered. That's why, when they found the sprawling Victorian estate at the edge of town, they knew it was meant to be theirs. The house had stood for over a century, its high gables and stained-glass windows whispering of another era. Though its bones were strong, time had not been kind to it. Layers of dust and neglect had settled into its wooden floors and intricate crown moldings. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Howell, had passed away without any living relatives, leaving the house frozen in time. For the past 6 months, Sam and Lillian had devoted themselves to restoring it, room by room. The kitchen was now a masterpiece of vintage charm, the living room had been revived with warm oak paneling, and the upstairs bedrooms had been brought back to life with careful attention to every detail. Only one place remained untouched, the attic. From the moment they moved in, something about it unsettled Lillian. Perhaps it was the way the door stuck, as if resisting entry, or how the floorboards groaned louder there than anywhere else in the house. Unlike the rest of the home, the attic was perpetually cold, no matter the season. For months, they had ignored it, using it only for storage. But on a crisp October morning, Sam decided it was time. A hidden discovery. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, he led the way up the narrow staircase, Lillian following hesitantly. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a cavernous space shrouded in dust. The wooden beams overhead were thick with cobwebs, and the air smelled of aged paper and forgotten memories. Old trunks, wooden crates, and antique furniture lay scattered in disarray. Faded lace curtains still clung to the small circular window at the far end, filtering in weak streams of light. Lillian shivered. "I don't like this place." Sam chuckled, tapping a wooden beam. "It's just an attic, Lil. Nothing to be afraid of." They set to work, shifting through old newspapers and discarded belongings. Most of it was mundane, outdated clothing, yellowed books, and broken furniture. But as Sam moved an old rocking chair, something behind it caught his eye. A wooden panel in the wall looked different. The grain was rougher, the color slightly off. His carpenter instincts tingled. "Hey, come look at this." Lillian peered over his shoulder as he ran his fingers over the panel. Without hesitation, he grabbed the crowbar and wedged it into the seam. With a loud crack, the wood splintered, revealing a dark, narrow cavity inside the wall. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Sam reached in and pulled out something heavy. A suitcase. It was small, its leather exterior cracked with age, the brass latches tarnished but still intact. It had been deliberately wedged deep into the wall, hidden away where no one was meant to find it. Lillian swallowed hard. Why would someone hide a suitcase in a wall? Sam ran his fingers over the surface. Only one way to find out. The suitcase opens. They carried it downstairs, placing it on the dining room table. For a long moment, they just stared at it. Lillian took a deep breath. "Okay. Open it." Sam flicked the latches. They resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse, but with a little force, they finally popped open. He slowly lifted the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in old cloth, lay several thick bundles. At first glance, they looked like old books, but as Sam peeled away the fabric, his breath caught. Not books. Stacks of letters, all tied together with a faded silk ribbon. And beneath them, something even stranger. A small, ornate wooden box, locked tight. Lillian picked up one of the letters, her hands trembling. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained elegant and precise. "To my dearest Evelyn," she read aloud. "If you find this, know that I never stopped waiting. I hope you understand why I had to disappear. I pray that one day, you will forgive me." Her voice faltered. Sam stared at the letter, then at the locked wooden box. What the hell is this? Before she could answer, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Lillian jolted. Who would be here this late? Sam glanced at the suitcase, then back toward the door. A chill ran down his spine. Something about this didn't feel like a coincidence. The stranger at the door. The knock echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate. Sam and Lillian exchanged a glance, their eyes drifting back to the old suitcase resting on the dining table. The timing was too perfect, too eerie. Who could possibly be at their door just minutes after they had uncovered something hidden for decades? Lillian's pulse quickened. Did you tell anyone we were working on the attic today? Sam shook his head. Not a soul. Another knock. This time, it was firmer, less patient. Sam hesitated, then stood up and strode toward the front door. Lillian followed closely behind, every step weighted with unease. As Sam reached for the doorknob, he felt a strange resistance in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. He turned the knob and pulled the door open. A man stood on their porch, silhouetted against the glow of the street lamp. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a dark trench coat. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of an old fedora, and when he finally spoke, his voice was deep and measured. I need to speak with you. Sam's grip on the door tightened. Who are you? The man ignored the question. You found something in your attic. It wasn't a question. Lillian stiffened. How do you know that? For a moment, the man simply stared, his expression unreadable. Then, he reached into his coat and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. He held it out to Sam. Sam hesitated before taking it. The image was old, yellowed with time. It showed a young woman in a simple dress, standing in front of their house. Her face was turned slightly away, but something about her posture felt familiar. Who is this? Sam asked. The man exhaled slowly. Her name was Evelyn Carter. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. Carter? The man nodded. She was the first woman to live in this house, and she disappeared in 1948. No one ever found out what happened to her. A shiver ran down Sam's spine. He turned the photograph over. Faint, elegant handwriting was scrawled on the back. My dearest Evelyn, 1948. He looked up at the stranger. What does this have to do with us? The man's eyes flickered toward the house. Because I believe she left something behind. And if you found it, you may be in danger. The locked box. The house felt different when they stepped back inside, as if the walls had absorbed the stranger's words and were holding on to them. The dining room was exactly as they had left it, the suitcase still open, the letters carefully stacked, the locked wooden box resting in the center. The man's gaze fell on the box. That's it. Sam folded his arms. Why don't you start telling us exactly what's going on? The man sighed, pulling out a chair and lowering himself into it. His posture was weary, like someone who had spent years chasing ghosts. My name is Richard Lawson. I've spent the last decade investigating disappearances connected to this house. Lillian's stomach tightened. Disappearances? Richard nodded. Evelyn Carter vanished in 1948. Her husband, Thomas Carter, was suspected but never charged. A few years later, the next owners reported strange noises in the attic, whispers, footsteps, even the sound of crying. Then, in 1965, a young couple moved in, and within 6 months, the wife disappeared without a trace. Sam swallowed hard. You're telling me our house is cursed? I don't believe in curses, Richard said. But I do believe in secrets. And your house is full of them. Lillian's gaze drifted back to the wooden box. What's inside? Richard exhaled. I don't know. But I believe Evelyn left it behind for a reason. Sam reached for the box, running his fingers over the intricate carvings on the lid. The lock was old-fashioned, its keyhole delicate and narrow. "There's no key," Lillian murmured. Richard's expression darkened. "Then we'll have to break it open." Sam hesitated. There was something sacred about the box, something that made him feel as though forcing it open would disturb something long forgotten. Still, he reached for the crowbar. As the metal touched the wood, a gust of wind tore through the room, sending the loose papers flying. The chandelier above them flickered, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. Lillian gasped, clutching her arms. "Did you feel that?" Richard's jaw tightened. "She doesn't want us opening it." Sam hesitated only a second longer before wedging the crowbar under the lid. With a sharp snap, the wood gave way, splintering as the box popped open. Inside was something wrapped in velvet. Sam carefully lifted the cloth away, revealing a single silver locket. The room was utterly silent. Lillian picked it up gently, her fingers trembling. She pressed the clasp, and the locket sprang open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph. A man and a woman, smiling. Evelyn Carter. And a man who wasn't her husband. The truth buried in the past. Lillian's heart pounded. This isn't Thomas Carter." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "No. It's not." Sam studied the photograph. "Who is he?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. But I think we just found the real reason Evelyn disappeared." A deep unease settled over them. Lillian could feel it pressing against her skin, like unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Suddenly, the floor creaked overhead. All three of them froze. Lillian's voice was barely audible. "We're the only ones here, right?" Sam swallowed hard, gripping the crowbar. He had lived in this house for months. He knew every sound it made, every creak and groan of its old wooden bones. But this sound wasn't the house settling. This was footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the attic. Richard was already standing, his expression unreadable. "We need to go up there." Sam hesitated. Every instinct told him that whatever was up there wasn't something they wanted to find. But as he looked at the old suitcase, the letters, and the locket, he realized there was no turning back. Whatever had been buried in this house's past was rising to the surface. And they were about to uncover the truth. Shadows in the attic. The house was silent, save for the slow, deliberate creaking of footsteps above them. Each sound sent a cold shiver down Lillian's spine. Sam tightened his grip on the crowbar, his knuckles white. Richard, his expression unreadable, moved toward the staircase with a quiet certainty, as though he had done this before. Lillian reached for Sam's hand. "Are we really doing this?" Sam swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't think we have a choice." Richard glanced back at them. "Stay behind me. If something happens, you run. Don't hesitate." With that, he placed a foot on the first step. The old wood groaned under his weight. Sam followed, then Lillian, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with something unseen, something watching. When they reached the second floor, the house fell into an eerie stillness. And then... creak. The attic. The sound had come directly above them. Sam turned to Richard. "You said other people disappeared from this house, do you think someone's still here?" Richard didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small and metallic. A gun. Lillian inhaled sharply. "What the hell?" "I don't know what we're dealing with," Richard said quietly. "But I came prepared." Sam stepped forward, placing a hand on the attic pull-down cord. "Ready?" Richard nodded. Sam gave the cord a hard yank. The attic door swung open with a groan, and a rickety wooden ladder unfolded downward. The opening gaped above them, black and endless. A strange smell drifted down, dust, old wood, and something else. Something sour, like decayed paper or forgotten time. Richard climbed first, moving with slow, deliberate precision. Sam followed, forcing his legs to move despite the mounting dread in his chest. Lillian hesitated but forced herself to go up after them. As soon as they reached the attic, the cold hit them. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on them like an unseen force. Sam lifted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dust. The attic was cluttered with forgotten things, broken furniture, dusty trunks, and old picture frames stacked against the walls. The wooden beams above them were draped with cobwebs, thick like curtains. But none of that was what caught their attention. No. At the far end of the attic, a single rocking chair was moving. Back and forth. Back and forth. As if someone had just stood up from it. Lillian's breath hitched. Oh my God. Richard took a cautious step forward. Someone was here. Sam scanned the attic, heart pounding. But where did they go? The rocking chair slowed, and then stopped completely. A whisper cut through the air. You shouldn't have opened the box. Lillian gasped, spinning around. Who said that? Silence. Sam's flashlight flickered. The temperature seemed to drop even lower, their breath now visible in the air. Then, from the shadows, something moved. Sam swung the flashlight toward it. A figure. Pale. Thin. A woman with hollow eyes, standing at the edge of the attic, her body half hidden in darkness. Lillian's scream caught in her throat. Sam stumbled back, his hand gripping the crowbar. Who are you? The woman didn't move. Her eyes flickered toward the locket still clutched in Lillian's hand. And then she whispered, her voice barely audible. Help me. A gust of icy wind surged through the attic, knocking over a stack of boxes. The flashlight flickered violently. When the light stabilized, she was gone. Lillian clutched Sam's arm. What the hell was that? Richard's face was pale. Evelyn. Sam turned to him. That was her? The woman who disappeared? Richard nodded. She's still here. Lillian's hands were shaking. We need to leave. We need to get out of this house. But Richard's gaze remained fixed on the spot where the woman had stood. His expression was grim. No. We need to finish what she started. Sam frowned. What do you mean? Richard pointed to the far wall of the attic, where the woman had been standing. She was trying to show us something. Sam followed his gaze. The wooden panels along the wall were warped and uneven, as though they had been tampered with. Richard moved toward them, reaching out. He knocked against the wood, once, twice. Hollow. There's something behind here, he murmured. Lillian backed away. I don't want to know. But Sam was already helping Richard pry the boards loose. One by one, they pulled them away, dust swirling in the dim light. And then, a small hidden space was revealed. Inside was a bundle wrapped in cloth. Sam hesitated before reaching for it. His fingers trembled as he pulled back the fabric. Inside, a skeleton. Small. Fragile. A child's remains. Lillian let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth. Sam felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. Richard closed his eyes. She wasn't just hiding. His voice was hoarse. She was protecting someone. Lillian took a step back, shaking her head. No, 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 no. But deep down, she knew the truth. Evelyn hadn't just disappeared. She had been silenced. And now, she was demanding justice. The rocking chair creaked once more. From behind them, the whisper came again. Find him. The attic door slammed shut. And the house fell into darkness. The forgotten truth. Darkness swallowed the attic. Lillian gasped as the door slammed shut, plunging them into suffocating silence. Sam's flashlight flickered wildly, its beam slicing through the dust-choked air. The old rocking chair creaked again, a slow, rhythmic motion, though no one was near it. Then, a whisper. Find him. Sam whirled toward the voice, but there was nothing there. Just the skeletal remains in the hidden compartment, the tattered cloth draped over them like a forgotten shroud. Lillian clutched his arm, her breathing uneven. Sam, we need to get out of here. Now. Richard, however, remained frozen, his gaze locked on the remains. He reached out, brushing the brittle bones with trembling fingers. This was a child, he murmured. A child who was never meant to be found. Sam's stomach twisted. Who would do something like this? Richard turned, his expression grim. We're not dealing with a simple haunting. This is a secret someone wanted buried forever. The moment he spoke, the temperature dropped again, the attic air thick with something unseen. A sudden gust of wind tore through the space, sending old papers and dust swirling into a chaotic dance. The rocking chair groaned one final time before going still. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Sam exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said. We get out of here. We call the police. We let them handle this. Richard hesitated. I don't think. We're not detectives, Sam snapped. We found a body. That's all we need to know. Lillian nodded fervently. Sam's right. We can't handle this on our own. Richard sighed. Fine. But something tells me the police won't be able to explain what we just saw. Neither Sam nor Lillian had an argument for that. Still, they moved quickly. Richard used his shoulder to force the attic door open, and they hurried down the ladder, leaving the attic secrets behind. The second they reached the hallway, Lillian grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with shaky fingers. Ring. Nothing. She frowned, pressing the phone harder against her ear. Come on, come on. Ring. Still nothing. Then. A voice, low and distorted. You shouldn't have looked. Lillian screamed, dropping the phone as if it had burned her. Sam. Sam grabbed the phone and checked the screen. The call was still connected, but the line was completely silent now. No dial tone. No static. Just, nothing. Lillian backed against the wall, shaking her head. This house doesn't want us to leave. Sam tightened his grip on her hand. We're leaving anyway. Richard, however, looked unconvinced. We're missing something. Sam shot him a look. Are you insane? We just found a hidden body, saw a ghost, and now our phone calls are being intercepted. That's our cue to go. Richard ignored him and turned his attention back to the attic. Evelyn said, find him. That means someone is still out there. Someone who knows what happened. Lillian's heart pounded. You think she meant the killer? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt and picked up the locket from where it had fallen on the hallway floor. The old silver pendant gleamed under the dim light, its surface covered in tiny, intricate engravings. He carefully pried it open. Inside was a photograph. A woman. And a young boy. The woman looked familiar, her delicate features, hollowed-out eyes, and wisps of blonde hair. The same figure they had seen in the attic. Evelyn. But it was the boy that caught their attention. His dark eyes were round and filled with innocence, but his face carried a strange resemblance to someone they had just been speaking to. Someone standing among them. Richard went pale. Lillian took a sharp breath. Sam's mouth went dry as he stared at the boy's face. A younger version of Richard. A suffocating silence filled the space. Lillian took a step back. Richard, her voice was barely a whisper. That's you. Richard's hand trembled as he stared at the photograph. No, he murmured. That's not possible. Sam swallowed. You said you were adopted. Richard's gaze darted between them, his breathing unsteady. I was. My adoptive parents told me I was found abandoned as a toddler. No birth records. No history. Lillian covered her mouth. Oh my God. Sam could barely comprehend it. Evelyn was your mother. Richard shook his head violently. No. That's impossible. But his voice lacked conviction. The pieces were falling into place. Evelyn had hidden the suitcase. She had hidden her child. But who had she been hiding him from? And more importantly, how had Richard survived when his mother hadn't? Lillian suddenly felt sick. Richard, if she was protecting you, then that means... Richard turned pale. That means the person she was hiding me from is still out there. A loud bang echoed through the house, shattering the moment. The front door. Someone had just entered. Lillian's pulse skyrocketed. Who was that? Richard shoved the locket into his pocket. I don't know. But we need to hide. Sam grabbed Lillian's hand and dragged her down the hall, Richard following close behind. They ducked into a closet, barely managing to shut the door before footsteps echoed against the wooden floors. Slow. Deliberate. Whoever had entered wasn't in a hurry. Sam held his breath, gripping the crowbar so tightly his fingers ached. He could feel Lillian trembling beside him, her breathing uneven. A shadow passed by the gap beneath the closet door. A voice, deep and steady, spoke. I told you not to open it. Lillian squeezed her eyes shut. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. Then, a hand grabbed the doorknob. The moment stretched into eternity. Sam's heart pounded so loudly he was certain whoever was outside could hear it. A slow twist of the knob. The door creaked open. Light spilled into the cramped space, illuminating their terrified faces. A man stood in the doorway. Tall. Broad shoulders. A weathered face with sharp features, aged by time but eerily familiar. Richard's breath caught in his throat. He knew this man. Somewhere, deep in his fragmented memories, he knew. The man's dark eyes locked onto him. And then, with a chilling smile, he whispered. Welcome home, son. The man in the dark. The world seemed to tilt. Richard's breath came in shallow gasps as the man's voice echoed in his ears. Welcome home, son. The words sent an ice-cold shiver down his spine. He felt like a child again, small, helpless, and lost in a past he couldn't remember. Sam tightened his grip on the crowbar, his knuckles white. Lillian clung to his arm, her entire body shaking. The man took a step closer, his eyes locked onto Richard like a predator watching its prey. It's been a long time, he murmured. You don't remember me, do you? Richard couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The man chuckled. A low, rasping sound. Of course you don't. They made sure of that. Sam finally snapped out of his trance. He shoved Richard behind him and raised the crowbar. Who the hell are you? The man's expression remained eerily calm. You don't need that, son. His gaze flicked to Richard. I'm only here for him. Lillian's grip tightened on Sam's arm. "You need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "We already called the police." The man smiled. "No, you didn't." Lillian stiffened. "You tried," the man continued. "But this house, my house, doesn't let things go that easily." Richard found his voice. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, considering the question. Then, he took another step forward, stopping just outside the closet's threshold. "My name is Vincent Hale." The name meant nothing to Richard. But the moment Vincent said it, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through his skull. He stumbled back, clutching his head as flashes of something, fragments of a forgotten past, flooded his mind. A woman's voice, whispering his name. A dark room. A locked door. A lullaby, cut off by screaming. Richard gasped, his knees nearly buckling. I don't." Vincent nodded as if he understood. "They erased me from your life. But deep down, your blood remembers." Sam took a step forward, positioning himself between Vincent and Richard. "You need to leave. Now." Vincent sighed. "I expected more gratitude." He reached into his pocket. Sam tensed, ready to swing the crowbar. But Vincent didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. He held it out to Richard. "Read it." Richard hesitated. Every part of him screamed not to trust this man. But something inside, something buried in the deepest parts of his subconscious, compelled him to reach out. His fingers brushed against Vincent's as he took the paper. The contact sent another surge of pain through his skull. Lillian touched his arm. "Richard, don't." But he was already unfolding the note. His eyes skimmed the words. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in a hurry. "If you're reading this, it means he found you. You don't remember me, but I am your mother. I did everything I could to keep you safe, my sweet boy. He is dangerous. If he tells you that he is your father, don't believe him. Don't let him take you. Run." Richard's heart stopped. His hands trembled as he reread the words. His mother had left this for him. A warning. His gaze snapped up to Vincent. "You," his throat tightened. "You're lying." Vincent's expression remained unreadable. "Am I?" Sam snatched the paper from Richard's hands and read it himself. His face darkened. "You need to get the hell out of here," he growled. Vincent smiled. "Or what?" Sam raised the crowbar. Vincent's smile widened. "Go ahead. Try." Something about his confidence made Sam hesitate. Vincent leaned in slightly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Richard's head pounded. "Tell me the truth," he demanded. "Who are you to me?" Vincent regarded him carefully, as if weighing his answer. Then, he spoke. "I am your father." Silence. Richard clenched his fists. "No. That's not possible." Vincent tilted his head. "And yet, here we are." Richard shook his head. "My mother hid me from you." His voice was rising, filled with anger and fear. "She said you were dangerous." Vincent exhaled. "She lied." Richard's stomach churned. "Why would she do that?" Vincent's gaze darkened. "Because she was afraid of the truth." Sam interrupted. "You expect us to believe you after we just found a body in our attic?" Vincent's expression didn't change. "You misunderstand." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Richard's. "She wasn't hiding you from me." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something undeniable. "She was hiding me from you." The room spun. Richard could barely process what he was hearing. Vincent took another step. You were the dangerous one, son. Lillian inhaled sharply. What are you talking about? Vincent's gaze remained on Richard. Do you remember anything about your childhood? Richard hesitated. No, Vincent said for him. Because they took it from you. He reached into his pocket again. Sam tensed. But this time, Vincent pulled out an old, black and white photograph. He held it up. Richard's breath caught in his throat. It was him. A younger version of him, no older than 4 or 5. He was sitting in the attic. And beside him was Evelyn. His mother. But there was something else. Scrawled in red ink across the bottom of the photograph were 4 words. He must never remember. The room seemed to close in. Vincent's voice was a whisper. You weren't abandoned, Richard. You were locked away. A ringing filled Richard's ears. Memories, shattered, fragmented, rushed back. The locked doors. The voices whispering at night. The shadows that moved when they shouldn't. He stumbled back, shaking his head. No. Lillian grabbed his arm. Richard. But Richard barely heard her. Because the final memory slammed into him like a tidal wave. The reason his mother had hidden him. The reason she had died. The reason Vincent was here now. A single, horrifying truth that made his blood run cold. He hadn't been the victim. He had been the threat. And Vincent Hale was the only one who had ever tried to stop him.